Here's the postmodern world. It's the Hobbesian nightmare. It's everyone against everyone else, except it's not individuals, it's groups. It's an attitude of skepticism, irony towards rejection of grand narratives, ideologies, and universalism. Criticizes objective notions of reason, human nature, social progress, absolute truth, and objective reality. It turned out that Marxist political doctrine kept producing evil empires, and even radical left French intellectuals were forced to admit that by the mid-1970s. You know, they'd put their head in the sand for 20 years, 50 years really. They came about pretty much when Marxism was no longer credible, no longer tenable as a set of intellectual propositions. Now, if you were a French intellectual, you had to have a lot of corpses piled at your feet before you were willing to think that you were wrong. So they started to play sleight of hand with the Marxist ideas. So instead of trying to promote the revolution of the working class against the capitalist class, let's say, they started to play identity politics and said, well, we can just separate everybody into oppressed versus oppressor, but we don't have to do it on economic grounds. They believe that since you don't have an individual identity, your fundamental identity is group fostered. And that means that you're basically an exemplar of your race, hence white privilege, or you're an exemplar of your gender or your sex or your ethnicity, or you're an exemplar of however you can be classified so that you are placed in the position of victim against the oppressor. There's a logical problem with it too that's even worse. And so you might be noticing that the LGBT set of acronyms keeps growing, eh? And it's kind of a form of its own parody in some sense. It's like, well, I'm oppressed. It's like, yeah, you are. Well, I'm also oppressed. Well, so am I. I'm oppressed too. It's like that it doesn't have a shred of gratitude. And there's something pathologically wrong with a person who doesn't have any gratitude, especially when they live in what so far is the best of all possible worlds. And so if you're not grateful, you're driven by resentment, and resentment is about the worst emotion that you can possibly experience apart from arrogance. Resentment, arrogance, and deceit. There's an evil triad for you. Frankly, you're a mess. And you're oppressed in every possible way, including your ancestry and your biology. And the entire sum of human history has conspired to produce victimized you with all your individual pathological problems. It's like, yes! So there's a tremendous number of constraints on our interpretations, and the postmodernists don't care about that at all. All they do is say, well, no, you can interpret the world any way you want. All people are ever doing is playing power games based on their identity, and there's going to be no crosstalk between the power hierarchies. It's not even allowed. That's why they don't engage in dialogue. And so for the postmodernists, the world is a Hobbesian battleground of identity groups. They do not communicate with one another because they can't. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out, because you're not exactly welcome. And neither are your ideas. Identity group against identity group against identity group. And you shut down people who don't agree with you, because why should you let them talk? Just to have a discussion with someone like you, you know, a heterosexual, what do they call a cisgendered male of power, you know, and white to boot. It's like, that's an evil act in and of itself, because all you're doing by engaging in dialogue with that person is validating their power game. They hijack, you know, fear, they hijack compassion, they make anyone who puts forward an alternative view into a terrorist of ideas, and someone who's heartless at the core, which is really incredibly intelligent. It's such a good strategy. It's so devious and brilliant, and it's so effective. Because who the hell wants to be labeled a bigot? Postmodernism is a complete assault on two things. It's an assault on the metaphysical substrate of our culture, and I would say that the metaphysical substrate looks something like a religious substrate, so it's a direct assault on that. And the second thing it's an assault on is everything that's been established since the Enlightenment. Rationality, empiricism, science, the idea of the individual. So that's what you're up against. I would say it's time for conservatives to stop apologizing for being conservatives. You know, and you don't apologize to these people. That's a big mistake. Apology, they read apology as an admission of guilt. You don't apologize and you don't back down. You young people that are out there who are university students, you need to take over the student unions. You need to take them back, because they're absolute snake pits, and they have been since the 1990s.